Let's bring in now our regular US and international affairs expert and visiting fellow at the US Study Centre, James Brown. James, what did you make of the State of the Union? How did you mark it?
Well, it had a lot of the same themes as last year, but I have to say that President Trump took it up a notch in terms of the theatricality of it. This was, even by his standards, a made-for-TV State of the Union with surprise reveals of troops coming home early from Afghanistan to the awarding of the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Rush Limbaugh. Some very familiar themes, though: a focus on the threat of immigration to the US's southern border, the strong performance of the economy, a rejection of socialism, and to hammer home that point, he had the Venezuelan opposition leader there just to really point to how bad socialism is in that country. But also the president trying to do a very optimistic tone, and like he did last year again, suggesting to the Democrats that they hold out a little bit more of a bipartisan spirit, although I don't think we'll see that anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm laughing because it's a laughable prospect, isn't it? Because it's so divided, that Congress. We've still basically just seen him cleared. He knew he was going to be cleared of that impeachment, of those charges. What I think his advisors would have been reassured about was that he was so disciplined, which is not always his strongest characteristic.
Look, you're right. He didn't go off on a riff. He didn't depart from the script. He didn't mix up any of the facts or figures like he sometimes does when he doesn't follow the speech exactly and stick with the teleprompter. There was plenty of support for him in the House. There were a couple of nice moments as well, but just the absolute depth of the divide between the two sides at the moment, with Nancy Pelosi ripping up that speech at the end of it, I think tells you everything you need to know about the state of Congress at the moment.
There was the theatre, but in terms of, you've touched on it already, but the way that they put that State of the Union together in a political sense to start 2020 really did hit every mark for Republican supporters.
Look, there's plenty of fact-checking that has been done and will be done on that speech, but if you're someone who reads that and responds to it instinctively and emotionally, there's enough there for you to go back to the ballot box and vote for President Trump. I mean, he was talking up his foreign policy success, talking up his success on North Korea. That's clearly something that could be very quickly and easily debunked. But to voters who really won't start to pay attention to this until September, it's a long way away, and don't follow it in as much detail, there's plenty to like in there. Strong economy, getting things done, not a career politician, and ripping up business as usual. But I think for those of us who watch it a little bit more closely, there's a few claims in that speech that you might not agree with.
One of the things that played into his hands this week and the Republicans was the debacle in Iowa. Could you believe that? Just how badly they stuffed that up?
I was trying to preempt the messages that President Trump would come out with, can't run a caucus, can't run the country, and we saw pretty much that. I mean, it was a mess. But also, the Biden result, I think, is one of the big takeaways out of that primary process. I mean, the fact that he got such low numbers, I think, is really very telling, validates Bloomberg's decision to enter the race. And Amy Klobuchar's numbers were pretty small as well. Particularly given she campaigned in all 99 of the counties in Iowa, which adjoins her home state. Having put that much effort in to get such a small response is a bit of a worry for her.
Can Bloomberg do a Stephen Bradbury, effectively come in later in the primary race, Super Tuesday? I know he's putting all his advertising into that, let everyone else fall over, and he comes up the middle with a lot of money.
Sort of Stephen Bradbury with rocket-powered skates. He just has so much power with this money that he can deploy, and the impact of that down the ballot is pretty significant as well. We'll see. I think it depends on what sort of message the Biden campaign crafts to explain their poor performance, whether they have ongoing poor performances in New Hampshire and Nevada. I think they'll do well in South Carolina. Bloomberg will really have to explain why he's the guy and not Biden. So to some extent, he'll have to react to Biden's campaign. Someone
that you picked very early as someone to keep an eye on, and I know because we've discussed it for well over a year now, is Pete Buttigieg from Indiana. And you were right, he's proving compelling to many people, and in those caucuses. Let's see if it carries on. But he's such an interesting candidate. He has 7 languages. He's a gay person, former military, served in Afghanistan, and just such an interesting, you know, 40 years younger than the other candidates as well.
Yeah, I think two things about the Buttigieg campaign in Iowa. I mean, they really threw everything at it, and they had a lot of organisers on the ground. I mean, there was some caucuses where, you know, they'd have 75 Buttigieg volunteers and there'd be 2 Biden volunteers. So they really mobilised a very strong and organised ground game. The thing I really noticed was just how many second preference votes were flowing to Buttigieg. Andrew Yang, who did pretty well in some parts of Iowa, all his people seemed to go to Buttigieg, or at least in the contests I was tracking. So Buttigieg is appealing as that second choice because he doesn't quite have the baggage a lot of the other candidates have. He's a relatively fresh face, and I think that goes to his appeal. Yeah. But of course, we also saw that moment where a Democratic Party member decided to pull their vote back after finding out that he was gay, and that's a big question too, whether voters, particularly in some of those states, are ready to elect a gay president. Well,
yeah, big question indeed, but fascinating as always. Thanks so much, James. We'll talk to you next week.